For those of you who don't know me, my name is Molly Brown. I'm the EVP of Corporate Strategy at GenPro Energy Solutions. Today on our panel, we've got Jess Baker with GRNE. We've got Bruce Vitosh with the GM and CEO of Norris Public Power District, and we've got Learon Dalby with today's power. Sorry. Escaped me for a moment. They're going to give you an update on what is currently going on in the state of community and municipal solar. But before we dive into each of their presentations, I kind of want to give you a little background about how community solar got started in the state of Nebraska. So circa about 2015, there were a few things going on in the market. Both LES and NPPD were kind of ruminating on starting community solar projects. I was working on a municipal solar project for the city of Lexington, and Cliff Mesner was over in Central City trying to figure out how to aggregate 25 kW systems, net metering systems for a bunch of business owners. So in 2015, we all came to this conference. Cliff and I met, and from there we decided to partner and built the first NPPD Sunwise Community Solar projects in Scottsbluff and Venango. From there, community solar kind of exploded across the state. There's projects everywhere from Fremont to Scottsbluff, and if you drive along I-80 and hit about every town on the way, there's going to be something along there. And today, just in the past few weeks, we energized the City of Norfolk's Community Solar Sunwise project with NPPD. It's the first solar plus storage project in the state of Nebraska, and now the largest solar array. It took me 7 years to get that title back from GRNE, so I'm excited to have that. But from there, we're gonna kick it over to Jess, and he's gonna tell us what's going on with some of the NPPD projects he's working on.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you all for attending and for all the sponsors that make this possible. I know all of the public power organizations that come together to help throughout our state, and we are such a unique state because of the public component of our electricity. And it's one of the few things that can you guys hear me okay? Sorry. Thank you. It's one of the few things that we all notice when it's not working, but very few of us appreciate when it is. So today, the fact that the lights are on means that we're probably not noticing, right? So make sure to thank all of those that make that a possibility. But before I get started, one thing I wanted to do is I got a little solar humor. So Molly didn't approve this, so if it goes over poorly, then it's not her fault. But who is a solar panel's favorite football player? JJ Watt. Ha ha ha, yeah, okay. I got the dad joke out of the way for today. My kids will be glad, so they don't have to hear it later. Anyway, so I'm with GRNE Solar. Recently became a Nelnet company. We were started in 2012, and we're a full-service EPC team, so we do work throughout the Midwest. We have 8 physical locations throughout the Midwest, serving to date 14 Midwestern states. We've got a lot of plans for growth and expansion within that, and the new IRA, of course, will help to promote and develop growth really throughout the United States, I would imagine. So we are a NAPSAP certified provider, and to date, we've done over 1,200 different projects throughout the Midwest. One of the things that we're talking about today, of course, is community solar, and some of the reasons of why community solar is an important part of the energy profile in the future is, one, it allows communities to utilize large solar projects for the benefit of the entire community. So some people don't have the ability individually to invest in renewables, and as a result, they can participate in community solar projects. And that does vary from state to state and from area to area, but thankfully these projects do allow for broader participation in renewables. Usually it's zero upfront cost for those who choose to participate, and it has the ability to make a large impact on those communities as well. And then as a part of the energy profile in the future, as was discussed in some of the previous conversations, it does help to increase grid stability, and the production profile of solar, largely mirrors the usage of energy, especially in the summer months. So those two things go hand in hand. And that's, I think, why we'll largely see a larger adoption of solar projects in the future as well. Just to highlight some of the projects that we've had the opportunity to be involved with through Nebraska Public Power District. One is Ainsworth. It is a 0.5 megawatt AC rated system. It's on some land there that was owned by the community, and they allowed us the opportunity to come in and provide power. Uniquely, that community then gets to sign up for subscriptions, and each community gets to choose how they want to do those subscriptions. And of course, NPPD helps to do that. And I want to give a shout out to Brittany. I just told her I was going to do this, but she did an amazing job at Ainsworth. And then the first evening where they opened up subscription, she had it fully subscribed. And if I'm remembering this wrong, correct me. But it was hats off to her, and she did an amazing job. And everyone there was so excited to participate, because it allowed an economic benefit to them if they signed up for the program. So when you take and couple today's marketplace of an economic benefit with a renewable product, it's really exciting for people to participate. So like, wow, I'm saving money and it's a renewable source. That's amazing. So good job, the NPPD team and Brittany on that. The next project is our York Community Solar Project, which we just energized here a few weeks ago. Well, we just had the ribbon cutting a few weeks ago, and we energized about 2 months ago. That project is on some land owned by the community and is basically providing power to the majority of the publicly owned assets. So the high schools and all the schools throughout the community, and a few others, and I'm forgetting the list. I reviewed this with Pat specifically so that I remember, but now I've forgotten. But the cool thing is that it's a direct benefit to the community and the services that provide benefit to all community members. So if you live and work in that community, you're directly benefiting from the existence of this project. So again, another huge win for that program and for the state in general and for the community of York as well. The last, and this system is yet to be energized, but it's near Ogallala, and it will provide power to that community, and then they get to choose how they want to offer subscriptions, whether it's to individual community members or potentially to just the community itself. That system is scheduled to be energized before the end of this year, and construction is underway, and it's been a really exciting project for that community and everyone who's been involved, and we're excited to be able to participate in that. One of the things I wanted to do was kind of compare and contrast a project that we did that was community solar but not in the state of Nebraska. So one of the things I think is really helpful for me is to learn how are my peers interacting with things that are similar but maybe different to what I'm doing. So a comparing project was one that we did in Kendall County. This is in Yorkville, Illinois, so it's a suburb of Chicago in essence. The unique thing about this project was we were able to provide power to 3 separate community-owned buildings from a single site. So if you look at the way the diagram's drawn there, it kind of shows how the power is distributed between those facilities. Illinois is a little bit different in that they're, of course, not a public power state. So we worked with Commonwealth Edison or ComEd for this project for the interconnection. A very unique attribute of that state and many others, and again, just to kind of show some of the differences in how states interact, but Illinois has a net metering limit of 5 megawatts. And so if you compare that to what we have in our state, and it's very different because of our public utility state. So I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just showing some differences in how different states interact with those net metering limits and how some of the laws, of course, allow us to interact with that differently. That larger net metering limit does allow for businesses and private entities to implement solar on a little bit larger scale for the direct benefit of their facility or their properties. So again, it's just something different. Love to answer questions specific to that if you'd like to learn more about how other states interact in this space. Of course, always happy to connect with all of you, and definitely look forward to the questions that follow. And Molly, I'll let you kick it over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Jess. And I think Jess brings up a really good point, because when we talk about community solar, we kind of use that term very broadly, but there are a lot of different structures that can come with community solar. Here in our state, our utilities stay super involved in their community solar projects. So like with NPPD, Sunwise, with Hastings, with Fremont, the utilities kind of manage those programs and deal with the billing and deal with the credits that go back on that. There are other states like Colorado and Minnesota where they completely have third-party models that will come in, build it, own the asset, actually go out and get the subscriptions and deal with the billing. So the utility is almost not involved at all. So that's pretty common with Excel in Minnesota. And there's my soda coming out there. And with Black Hills Energy down in Colorado. So there's a lot of different things, but there's also community solar that is not necessarily subscription-based or for the end user, but is just sited in a community. A lot of the municipal utilities throughout Nebraska, Lexington, Cozad build projects in their community that they're basically just using for their distribution grid, which I believe is similar to what Norris Public Power District is doing with their new solar program. So come on up, Bruce.
Good afternoon, everyone. Certainly glad to be here today, and looking forward to talking about a project we have going on at Norris with some solar, and thought it was a pretty big deal. We're going to be installing 6 megawatts of solar on our throughout our distribution system at Norris, and I saw Javier has I think 600 megawatts he's looking at, so we're a little small in comparison to that, but still a big project for us, and we're excited about doing that. So just want to give you just a brief background about Norris and who we are, and then I'll jump into what we have going on with solar here at Norris. So you can see up there on the screen that we do serve customers in those 6 counties that you can see up there, and basically in those areas we serve all of the rural areas in those 6 counties. There's a little bit of area that we don't serve in rural areas down in Jefferson County, but for the most part we serve all that rural area and most of the communities in those 6 counties. So a little bit more about Norris, just talk about the customers that we have. So we're up to 26,000 customers, or basically meters if you want to look at it that way, spread throughout those 6 counties. And there is 53 communities that we do serve throughout those 6 counties. And of those 53 communities, 49 of those we serve at retail, so we're the retail provider for them. There's actually 4 of those communities that we do serve at wholesale. And in our power supply, we do buy our power from Nebraska Public Power District. We do have an all requirements wholesale power agreement with NPPD. We signed that back in 2016. And so we're proud to be with NPPD, and we do serve around the city of Lincoln. You know, LES has their own system here, as you saw and know. And but we do have about 2% of our power that does come from LES because of how we serve some customers around the city of Lincoln. So that's a little bit about Norris, and I'm going to jump into our project here and what we've got going on. So as I mentioned, we buy all of our power from NPPD, and within that agreement with NPPD, we have a 10% allowance where we can install or own and operate local renewable generation. So there's a 10% allowance in our contract with NPPD. And again, like I mentioned, we signed that back in 2016, and so we immediately began looking at some solar that we can install within our service territory. Looked at a 3 megawatt solar project, and then also in 2018 we worked with a large industrial customer. They were interested in some solar and wind, and so we were trying to work with them as well. And in both of those instances, it just didn't work out economically at that time to do that. And mainly it was because of the size. And when we compared what we'd have to pay in a PPA to what our power costs are from NPPD, it just didn't work at that time. So a couple years later, I was reading, a lot of reading about the industry, and I saw that Kansas had a program down there which is called the Kansas Cooperative Sun Power Program. And that's a program where ultimately they had 16 of the electric cooperatives who operate very much like we do as a public power district here in Nebraska. But they had 16 of the electric cooperatives came together and worked together on installing solar that was distributed throughout their service areas. So they weren't necessarily in one area, but they had 1 megawatt sites spread throughout their service areas. And so ultimately there's over 22 megawatts of installation there, and I think they might be even adding to that, and maybe Learon will talk about that here in a little bit. But anyway, I saw that model and it worked for them, so I thought, well, we need to look at that again. So I worked with our neighbors, neighboring public power districts, talked to them, asked if they would be interested in looking at this and what they were doing down in Kansas, and our neighbors were interested. And so we started looking at and exploring solar again. And ultimately, our intent was to work together in a small group, get the details worked out, get some pricing lined up, and then have other public power districts join us. For whoever wanted to join us, they certainly could in the future. And that was the plan all along. So ultimately, or I guess I call it the Nebraska Solar Power Consortium, we ended up installing in the Norris service territory, we'll be installing 6 megawatts of solar. So again, they're divided up into 6 different sites throughout our service area. And the size is limited to 1 megawatt in size on an AC basis. And we were looking at PPA pricing with a fixed price and no escalators over a 25-year term, which is what we ended up with on our PPA. And by having others potentially join us in the future, we worked out an arrangement with our ultimate solar power provider that once we hit 10 megawatts in solar, we had a certain PPA price that was fixed. And as others may join us, and once we reach 20 megawatts and 30 megawatts, that PPA price we'd pay would be discounted and we would get a better price and we would all share in that particular price. One of the things I just want to mention there, that bottom bullet, is that in talking to the solar developers that we were working with, just thought it made sense that when it came to the sites, the solar sites, that we would work with the local landowners. They are customers of ours. We've been a power provider to them for many, many years. We've been in existence almost 90 years. And so we just thought it would make sense for us to work with the landowner rather than having a solar developer come in and do that. So we were responsible for either acquiring the land or leasing the land. So again, like I mentioned, we connected this to our distribution system. And we did get some help. Ultimately, we had a consultant help us, and also we had legal counsel obviously involved in working on this project with us. And I guess what I want to point out here is that when you look at the PPA pricing and also all these costs that we were incurring either through the consultant and also the legal counsel, again, that was part of that economies of scale and working together with others. We decided that we would share the cost equally amongst all of us. We're putting in 6 megawatts on our system. Some of the public power districts are only putting in 1 megawatt on their system. But ultimately, we decided let's just share those costs equally and not get too particular about how those costs were being shared amongst us. So that's worked out very well. So the participants we have currently, so we started with 6 public power districts. And actually, one of those 6, they were working on some projects on their own with another solar developer. So they chose to continue down that path with the solar developer they were working with. We had one that ultimately decided it didn't make sense for them right now at this time. The timing wasn't right. And ultimately, we actually had 4 public power districts. One's not listed there, but of course ourselves. Then we had Polk County, Howard Greeley Rural Public Power District, and also Butler County Public Power District is also involved with this project. They had some issues with their site, and so ultimately they're not actively working on the construction of solar in their area, but they are interested in getting that done. We did receive quotes from multiple solar developers, and when we received all those quotes, as we were looking at the quotes and the PPA and basically the term sheets that were being proposed to us, that's not our expertise, and so we ended up hiring GDS Associates to help us with that and to make sure that when we were looking at the particular PPA pricing proposals, that we were looking at those on an apples and apples basis. So we did appreciate GDS helping us with that. And ultimately, through this competitive bidding process that we went through, Today's Power Inc. was awarded the PPA. We awarded that to them, the project to them. And again, Learon will talk a little bit more about TP Hire in a little bit. And I'll just say that there was a lot of legal work involved in this, a number of agreements. And so those of you utilities here that may be interested in doing something like this, we had our legal counsel involved in the term sheets, the power purchase agreement, of course, working through the details of that. And also we had to develop a property owner lease agreements. So basically the projects that we have, 5 of those 6 sites were actually leasing the property from landowners. And so we worked with legal counsel and ensured that we had a lease agreement that was very attractive to the property owner. That's typically who they work with on that side. So that we worked with them on that. And then also there was a site access agreement. So we leased the property from the landowner, and we turned around and have an agreement with TPI to give them access to that site so they could construct their solar array. So selecting the site. So I had a slide there before that shows that we cover 6 counties. And here in southeastern Nebraska, we cover about 3,700 square miles. And you think, well, geez, it'd be easy to find 6 different 10-acre sites. Well, it's not quite so easy, and the things that you see up there on the slide are some considerations that we had to go through. From being near a Norris distribution substation, the 3-phase distribution circuit had to be adjacent to the property. And ultimately, we did get 6 willing landowners. And once we found the sites that worked and met all these requirements, we did have, again, multiple landowners that were very willing to work with this and put this solar on their sites. So again, we're putting in 6 sites at Norris. 2 of them are in Gage County. You can see that we have 4 others in 4 of the other counties that we serve. We actually, again, own one of the sites here just southwest of Lincoln. We have our operations center southwest of Lincoln, and we had excess land there, so we put a solar array on that site. Now, what I point out on this slide here would be the lease payment. So on 4 of those 5 leases that we have with property owners, we ultimately indexed the lease payments to those landowners based on cropland cash rental rates. So UNL agricultural website, if you go out there, I think it goes back maybe to the mid-'70s. They have all the history of cash rental rates, and of course, if you're trying to buy land, it has land values as well. But we worked with those landowners, and we both thought it would make sense, and it was very fair to utilize that website. And so we've indexed our lease payments on an annual basis off that website. So as values change in those cash rental rates for the farmers, then their rates will, or the payments we make to them would change accordingly on an annual basis. Here's some more solar site details. I won't get into all this and walk through this. I'm guessing Learon may talk about some of this here. But I'll just say that this is a single axis tracking system, and the solar panels are bifacial, so they can generate power on both sides of the panels. And when we were looking at the sites, we were looking at sites that were relatively level because of the single axis tracking system. And we did find some sites that were relatively level, and of course there's shading issues you got to be concerned with and those sorts of things. But but these are some of the details when it comes to the solar sites and what that looks like. And I just want to point out the last thing on this slide here is that the native grasses and pollinators. So that is important that we have native grasses and pollinators on these sites. And in fact, one of our sites is currently in CRP right now, and it's coming out of CRP, and so it's in native grasses already. And so we're going to take advantage of that and install the solar arrays on top of this solar, or where the CRP is currently located. So again, that property is just coming out of the CRP program. So NPPD, again, this is maybe for the utilities here in the room, and just got a couple slides here left. But there is a K450 process with Nebraska Public Power District, and it's basically a transmission study that they do for us to ensure that when we install this solar or wind or whatever you might be installing on the system, that it's analyzed. And I believe it's anything sized at 500 kW or larger. It has to have this study done. And there's a load to generation ratio that you need to be aware of, and make sure you think about that to make sure there's enough load in the area so they can handle the generation off the solar arrays. And also the approval process. I know that NPPD, their engineering department's very busy right now with a lot of projects and a lot of things going on. So you just want to make sure you get yourself in the queue if you're thinking about doing something like this. And of course, this would be for those of you that are customers of NPPD. So customer benefits, just want to point out in here again, so the way we looked at it from a financial perspective, again, we've got a fixed price for 25 years, and it's a low fixed rate. We're very, very happy with the PPA pricing we received. And basically, we're generating savings for our customers because of the peak shaving that comes with this solar generation. The last slide I have on here, it has to do with the direct pay credits to public power districts. Again, it's been mentioned here quite often here this morning, so I won't go into details on that, but it is kind of a game changer for public power districts and electric cooperatives in that we had to go through a solar developer and have them basically own and operate these solar arrays so that the tax credits could be taken advantage of. Now with this direct pay credits, in the future, if we choose to put some more solar in, then we could potentially own that and take advantage of those credits directly. So with that, that kind of concludes my remarks here. And where we're at right now on these projects is we're basically in the pre-construction phase. So we've kind of turned it over to TPI, and they're working on that. And we hope to have construction started here after the first of the year. So thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Now we're going to have Learon come up and talk a little bit about the development process and the construction process.
I work for Today's Power, and we were selected in Nebraska. And I'm just going to move through these slides pretty quick because I think we want to get to some questions, hopefully. Today's Power, we are owned by Arkansas Electric Cooperatives, Inc. We were formed in 2014. The statewide electric cooperative organization recognized renewables was coming. They said, hey, let's just form our own company. And so we are owned by the 17 cooperatives in the state of Arkansas. And then obviously we have a community focus and carry all those same values, which are mirror yours. These are some of our projects, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, across the country, really. This expands to what we're working on from a construction standpoint. You can see Nebraska's lighting up there. I hope to see a lot more dots there as well. And then moving out into Navajo Nation there in the far west with some very interesting projects there. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here except for to say there's more information on our website if you want to visit and learn more about this initiative and who's involved and how to get involved, and I'm sure that Bruce would be more than happy to talk about it as well. So our process, and this is not unique to here, this is anywhere that we've had success with over the years, and it's probably the exact same process that any developer, EPC, or owner and operator in the room would tell you. They all go nod their head and go, yeah, that's what we do. One thing that we focus on is working very closely with the utility and letting them select the sites for all those reasons that were pointed out in the previous presentation. Typically, they're going to know their networks better. They're going to understand their capacities and their loads and everything else. Could we do it? Sure, but then we're just going to charge you. So we feel it's best in everybody's best interest for them to take that on. We have preliminary designs. The geotech is completed. We do groundbreakings because everybody likes to get their pictures in the paper. And so we have those groundbreakings. This is a construction site that was very muddy up in northeast Arkansas. It started with very little vegetation, and we actually had to re-vegetate it afterwards with those pollinators and natural grasses, which we do across the country. In Arkansas, Kansas, Nebraska specifically. So then we do commissioning, which typically is a pretty straightforward process, but I mean, hey, look, if you're an EPC, let's all agree, it's a real pain in the ass. But when it goes good, and you get in and out in a day, and then you get to have a flip the switch, which is another opportunity for everybody to get their name in the paper. And that's good for everybody, right? A couple of projects, they're just, I mean, again, talking about how different states do different things. In Arkansas, we're very pro-solar, interestingly enough. We have a state net metering law that allows for a one-to-one credit, which is fairly unique. Can't say that the utilities always love that, but it does provide some interesting opportunities for them when they take advantage of it. For example, we built two 2 megawatt facilities for General Dynamics. Most of you are probably aware of who they are. And then we put battery storage on top of those specifically for the cooperative there in Arkansas. We're a summer peaking state, so June, July, August, September. We set peak each one of those months, and then that sets our demand for the year. So if you can shave that peak, you can get a lot of savings. And we've run the numbers multiple times in Arkansas, can't speak for everywhere else. And by coupling solar and batteries, those kilowatt hours lost in payment are a lot less than what they're making on this peak shaving component. Very similar thing that we've done with Ozarks Electric in northwest Arkansas. City of Fayetteville says we want to be solar, we want to be, or shouldn't say solar, we want to be 100% green. They have some very strong initiatives for that city. That's where the University of Arkansas resides, for reference. So we coupled again solar for the member or the off-taker with batteries for the utility. And once again, they've seen that peak shaving opportunity. So we've done this in about 4 cooperatives across the state. What's interesting is between that and interruptible irrigation rates, I don't know if you all have that here, but where we can just kill water. You know, they're on the interruptible rate. They get a sweet rate, but we can kill it anytime we want. Between those items, we're seeing peaks start to shift around. And so it's pretty interesting to see what you can do And as these cooperatives start to cooperate and work together, it's going to be really interesting to see how they move it around. Last slide, I think. Yours was actually more up to date than mine. But 20 megawatts, I think it's up to 22 now. Cooperatives have extended from 12 to 17. This has been over the course of about 3 years. We had round 1, and then we had round 2. We had round 3. We thought, okay, it's done. And now we're working on a 4th round of projects in Kansas across the state. We do have an operations center. We probably are a little bit different in that we actually do everything from develop, EPC, and then we own and operate probably 95% of our systems. I do see that changing for all the reasons that have been discussed over the last few hours, but currently we own and operate. For those that are purchasing systems, for in the past, equity developers, people that had purchased systems but didn't have operation and maintenance, we do provide those services. So with that, that's my contact information, and let's get to some questions.
Thank you. So before we hop into some audience questions, I did want to touch a little bit on some hot topics that we have for today and ask questions of the panel up here. I think, Bruce, one of the things that you touched on was the siting of these systems as a state that is into agriculture and has a lot of pivot irrigation. Substation swings are a huge issue. So how did you go about finding the ideal sites for your projects?
Yeah, excellent question there. So we had an engineer that went through and looked at all of our distribution substations, and ultimately we had to look at where our load was at on a year-round basis. So as you state, with irrigation, there's some obviously seasonality to that. And so we focused our efforts on our distribution substations that didn't have quite as much irrigation on there. Maybe had a little more industrial load and more residential load. And so we had to ensure that there was enough year-round load. And so we're a little bit different in this part of the state at Norris Public Power District because we do have a lot of irrigation, but when you start looking at some of the other public power districts that are further out west and in the areas that have more irrigation, their ratio of irrigation load to the rest of the load is a lot higher. So, but we did take that into account as we looked at our different distribution substations.
Perfect, thank you. And then both for Jess and Learon, what kind of supply chain issues have you guys been seeing as you've been going through your current builds?
Yeah, I think we've all experienced challenges related to the current marketplace, and many of those challenges that we experience in solar-specific projects, bleed into the same things that utilities are experiencing, whether it's transformer supplies and those kind of things. So I think back to some of the times in mid-2019 and the access to materials that we had back in those times, and would love for those days to come back, and I hope that they do. But I think, the big ones, as we all probably know in this room, transformers have been huge. There definitely needs to be an expansion in the ability to produce and manufacture that good, hopefully here in the United States. But yeah, we've definitely seen an impact, I think, on almost every product component, from large, solar modules, all the way down to the smallest thing, like something as simple as a plastic fitting. Sometimes those plastic components that are manufactured out of petroleum products were largely hit through manufacturing as well. So we've seen it on many fronts, and I'm looking forward to those days where we don't have to plan so far in advance for little things like we once did. But I think a big shift that we've seen in our teams is that we've just got to plan much better, meaning that a product that maybe we once received in 2 to 3 months, we're now seeing a 24-month or longer lead time. And so proper planning is the key, and that's going to also be a critical component to completing projects in a timely manner. As we see large of adoption, increased demand, that's going to compile the issues. So I'll give it over to you.
Yeah, I think the planning component, obviously, and then communicating. Just communicate, and make sure people understand what these timelines are. I mean, you're all dealing with it already. Transformers were mentioned, which is going to be a huge issue, obviously. But we are all experiencing it. One thing that we did, and I know that many others did in this planning component, is we stockpiled a lot, just in advance. Now, unfortunately, that one little thing can get you, right? So if I don't have that one thing I might need, but thus far we're doing okay with our schedules and keeping up. And I do think that just we're all living it, so the more we can communicate and keep our customers aware of what those schedules are and when things are happening, the better.
If I could add to that here, Molly, too.
Sure.
Comment. So the American Public Power Association, so the APPA, and also the NRECA, which is the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, those organizations have come together and kind of in relation to this IRA that we've been talking about, this bill. I think there's like $250 million that was allocated to help with the electric heat pumps, that program that was out there. And they requested basically the Department of Energy to reallocate that money to help the transformer manufacturers here in the United States to help with recruiting and retaining the workforce, to help with the lack of transformers that we're experiencing right now. So I know that our organizations, NASI, are trying to work hard to help us with those issues as well.
So on your current projects in your portfolio, did any of you guys look for some creative alternative funding or grants on your projects?
I don't know how creative it is, but Today's Power is an RUS borrower, so ourselves as a company. And so that provides us some interesting long-term financing for these things. I don't know how creative that is, but it's unique maybe in some instances from other developers.
Okay, I think we'll open it up to audience questions. That was, do you ever put the panels high enough to get livestock under them?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've definitely seen deployments in different ways throughout the country, and kind of a repurposed technology that's already in existence is parking canopies are very common in the Southwest and the West. And so that technology that already exists structurally could be applied to farms where you might want to use solar panels for livestock shading. But yes, they absolutely can be set up off the ground. Of course, there's things to consider when thinking about that. Dust and soiling can be an issue as well. So you would need to accommodate that as part of your plan to ensure that you've got proper maintenance long term. But yeah, it absolutely could be done in application, and there's already applications that exist for that.
Any other questions?
For vegetation control, can you discuss sheep versus goats versus autonomous mowers?
Don't get goats.
So I don't know if any of you all have had experience with goats, but I would avoid the goats. Sheep are a viable solution. Many people are using those. Interestingly enough, we have seen a lot of industry solutions around robotic mowing applications. So there are a number of manufacturers out there creating products that allow the charging component to be added into the solar array. And then the mower goes around, does its job throughout the day, and comes back to this charging station, charges overnight, and it's deployed again for the next day. So I think there will be more technology solutions. Interestingly enough, that the sheep are still a great solution. I think the challenge that many forget when hoping to deploy that technology is access to water is important for any livestock. So including that as a component of design. I know we've been asked that question retroactively a few times. They're like, well, we're going to get sheep and turn them out. And I'm like, that's a great idea. Just make sure you've got a place to access water. And then usually that becomes a limiting factor depending on the size of the area. So, of course, if you can bring water tanks and stuff to provide water for the livestock, it's not a problem. But yeah, we've seen a number of solutions there. And I think the robotic and electronic mowing applications are probably the ones that will be the winners long term. Because as we all know with livestock, there's a certain amount of care and attention that needs to be given. And it's not always a perfect year-round solution either.
Quick follow-up. Because they jump on top of it?
Yeah. Well, and they have a tendency to eat more than they should. So, some of our wires, although maybe appetizing to a goat, aren't the most healthy for a number of reasons. So, that's usually the reason. They like to jump on things. They'll walk around on top of the solar panels, and things like that as well. So yeah, I should have elaborated, so thank you for the clarification.
I would just add real quick that, if you're doing native pollinators or native grasses, these sites aren't going to look like your fairway at the golf course, right? I mean, if you go to the city of Fayetteville and you look at their site where it's really established, it's been there for going on 4 years now, this looks like a hayfield because it started as a hayfield. And that's really what we're trying to do. But we oftentimes have people come and say, well, when are you going to mow it? And when are you going to weed eat it? And that's kind of defeating the purpose of the pollinators and native grasses.
And if you want to see an example of the electronic mowers, the city of Schuyler currently uses one at their solar farm.
Thank you. Good discussion. Maybe just a naive question or one that I just want answered. So I'm from Minnesota too. Came down here 6 years ago. The first community solar projects I saw in Minnesota were with our rural electric co-ops. And the reason a lot of them finally came into existence were because people, their customers, the co-op customers, wanted to put solar in their yards, on their roofs. Net metering was picking up there and everything else. And so in this case, the Meeker County co-op decided, wait a minute, we don't want these things all over town and the issues that come with it. We're going to build a community solar plot, but then let them buy a panel or 2 or 3, depending on their house. Now, most of what we're talking about here is, okay, I'm going to put a megawatt or 6 megawatts. I'm just throwing it up on the system. So we are generating renewable energy, which is great. But I, as a customer in town, still want my own system. I want to be able to take the tax deduction. I want the depreciation. I want to take I want the benefit of some of the programs out there, and I want the benefit ultimately of lowering my rate. Is there any of those coming in Nebraska since we are a public power, number one? Number two, are there hybrids where you put on a megawatt, but then you have adjoining to that a half a megawatt or a quarter or whatever, so people, clients in Beatrice or in Gage County or other places can literally buy panel number 432, I own it, I get some of the benefits as a customer. I want the benefits, not necessarily just building into the grid.
Yeah, I'll take the answer to that question because I've worked on a lot of these different programs. So the NPPD Sunwise program is offered to the customers. So you buy kilowatt hour blocks. The city of Fremont and the city of Hastings have hybrid programs where you can buy either kilowatt hour blocks or actual panels. So you can get your serial number, you can get exactly where in the array your own panel is, and you can actually get the tax benefits off of those systems as well. So those do already exist throughout the state. It just depends on the utility and what you're trying to gain out of the project. So those do exist in Nebraska, and they're being expanded on currently as well.
There's a tax that they pay, a nameplate capacity tax. How does that work with a public power district or community?
I think you're referencing the nameplate capacity tax that we have here in Nebraska. So in our arrangement with today's Power Inc., it's I think it's like right around $3,500 a megawatt is what that nameplate capacity tax is. And so in our agreement with TPI is they would be responsible for paying that particular tax.
Well, thank you everybody for sticking around and listening to our panel, and thank you to our great panelists.